CTV gets permission from the Saudis to talk about the TV ad they won't run. And it's just embarrassing. Tonight on The Source. CTV is Canada's largest private broadcaster. They're our competitor. I want us to beat them. Well, I don't actually want them literally beaten or beheaded or stoned to death, which is why I put aside my competitive rivalry to say I want CTV to be free from Saudi censorship. As Stockwell Day, the former Conservative cabinet minister, told us on a show earlier this week, it's hard to think of a precedent for the outrageous conduct of the Saudi dictatorship, issuing threats to Canadian broadcasters, demanding them not run ads, criticizing Saudi abuses of women. It's unheard of. And it's a terrible precedent that CTV has complied with this Saudi threat. I mean, remember, when the Saudis hire one of the world's largest law firms, a 2,600-man monstrosity called Norton Rose, it's not just a regular lawsuit. It's not some ordinary dispute, the kind that's in our courts all the time. Remember, there isn't an actual lawsuit here. Norton Rose has refused to explain what their legal problem is with the ad. We even sent them a letter asking them to tell us why they don't like it. They haven't answered. Of course not, because it's not a lawsuit. It's a threat of a lawsuit, which is a different thing. It's one step away from blackmail. It's pure bullying, which is why both Norton Rose and the Saudis are avoiding reporters. Look, this is not a natural resources issue. This is not an environmental issue. This is not a women's rights issue, even though that's what the ad talked about. This is an act of foreign interference. It's an attack on Canadian sovereignty by a foreign power. It's a dictatorship using a law firm to do its dirty work for it. It's not a fair fight because even the biggest company in Canada cannot outspend and outfight a murderous dictatorship like Saudi Arabia. Look, that country is barbaric. They can hire the fanciest law firm in the world, but at the end of the day, these are dictatorships who treat their prized camels better than they treat women. And now they're treating CTV like they treat their own state-censored, state-controlled reporters. It is a shame. But back to CTV. Finally, yesterday, they just couldn't pretend nothing was wrong anymore, so they had to talk about the fact that they were being bullied. So after being bullied in silence, they admitted they were being bullied in public. That's a baby step, I guess. They probably got an earful from the Saudi embassy for that little act of defiance. But let me show you some of the clips from CTV's bizarre show yesterday. And you tell me, my friends, are some people at CTV suffering what psychologists call Stockholm Syndrome? You know what I mean by that? That's when hostages actually start to have feelings for their hostage takers. They actually flip around and start to agree with their abusers. It's a way of coping with the extreme duress of being kidnapped. It's called Stockholm Syndrome because, you know, there was a 6-day hostage taking at a Stockholm bank back in the 1970s. And some of the prisoners had actually developed an emotional attachment to the criminals, even defending them, even after they were freed. Do some people at CTV have Stockholm Syndrome? You tell me. Let's go through different parts of their show yesterday. Here's Jacqueline Masharek dipping her toe into the story, clearly being very, very careful not to offend CTV's new Saudi masters. Here she is on last night's show, breaking CTV's days of silence on this subject.
Well, a Canadian-made TV ad has angered the government of Saudi Arabia. The ad asks people to stop buying Saudi oil. The Saudis don't like it, and they have now sent a legal notice to us here at CTV. For the moment, CTV has decided not to air the ad, but we will show you a small snippet of that ad right now.
Oh, a small snippet. Welcome to life under Saudi censorship. They'll allow a small snippet of the ad, and for now, Jacqueline herself is allowed to broadcast without wearing a burqa. For now. To her credit, one of CTV's panelists on the subject is Tasha Keratin, who clearly was not vetted by the Saudi embassy. Here's what Tasha had to say about the ad.
I think it's about time that somebody called out the Saudi regime. We've been hearing always the same.
I think so too. I mean, Tasha put forward the case for ethical oil throughout the segment. I actually thought she did a pretty good job. But then came CTV's star commentator, Scott Reid. Reid used to be Paul Martin's deputy chief of staff and spin doctor. And his hatred for Canada's oil industry became obvious pretty quickly back then. I mean, in 2004, Reid threw a fit when Newfoundland was trying to keep its share of oil royalties, Reid said they were making, quote, a mistake of historic proportions on the backs of Newfoundlanders, unquote. Yeah, because they were just trying to keep some of their oil money. In the next year, according to reporter Don Martin, Scott Reid was just as venomous about Calgary's oil industry, saying, quote, Alberta can blow me, unquote. Classy guy. But then this was the guy who also said that if Canadians got $100 a month for daycare to spend as they please, instead of a government daycare spot, the parents would just waste it on, quote, beer and popcorn. So maybe Scott Reid is more of a spin intern than a spin doctor. But he knows how to be loyal. And so instead of being loyal to Canada and free speech, he was loyal to CTV and its decision to blacklist the ethical oil TV ad. So he started doing some heavy lifting on the Saudi side of this fight. Here's what he said about the ad, commenting on the Saudi abuse of women.
It is designed exactly to allow people to feel that they have no obligation to deal with hard truths. And here are some of those hard truths.
So Ethical Oil runs an ad criticizing Saudi abuse of women. And the Saudis threaten CTV and other broadcasters not to air it. But to Scott Reid, he thinks the problem here is with the contents of the ad itself. He says it's just a distraction from man-made global warming, and we shouldn't be distracted from that theory by anything as boring as Saudi threats for his own employer, CTV. And when a woman, a free woman, not one in a burqa, dares to disagree with Reid, he says that she's in the pocket of a British oil company.
Go on record and
Miss
say
British Petroleum 2011. Let me finish my argument.
Is that what my new title
point is this.
Thanks.
It is logically bankrupt, this argument. It is to say, listen, if I smell bad, but because someone else smells worse than me, why should I bother taking a bath?
Scott, let me get in here.
Oh, that's just gross. So first, Reid is making the Saudi argument here, but he accuses Tasha of working for a British oil company. Classy. At least he didn't tell her to blow me. It's not logically bankrupt to criticize Saudi abuse of women at all. And to say that we all smell bad, so we shouldn't call out the Saudis on women's rights. Well, Reid can speak for himself about how he smells, but in Canada, women can do anything they want. The Chief Justice of our Supreme Court is a woman. The last two Governors General in a row are women. We don't smell bad on women's rights. The Saudis do. But here's Reid really going for broke. I mean, he sounds like he's auditioning for a job as the Saudi spokesman in Canada. It's too much. But look at what Jacqueline says next. Look at this.
Are we really more ethical than countries like Saudi Arabia? And I put this to you because...
yeah, over here, I think I can answer that. Yes. Yes, we are more moral than the Saudis. I mean, normally, I don't really care what CTV has to say on their channel. Unlike the CBC, they don't live off the taxpayers' teat. So I don't criticize them too much. I mean, they're a competitor. Good for them. But in this case, they are acting as an instrument of Saudi foreign policy, under duress, I'm sure. It's a job that Reid really seems to enjoy, doesn't he? So I'm going to take just another moment to go through his bizarre comments. I mean, here's the next one. Look at this.
It is designed to make you feel better about doing nothing.
No, it's not. No, it's not. It's designed to make change. It's designed to make change happen.
Permission to not bother. Have yourself, and it's paid
look,
for
you know
by
what
the
it
oil
is?
industry.
Let me tell you. Okay, on one hand you have...
Just really weird. I mean, he's being paid by CTV, which is under Saudi threats. They say, even beginning their show, that they're under duress and will only show a snip of the ad. So distract from that, Reid casts aspersions on the motives and control of others. But how about CTV? What business deals does its owner, Bell Canada, have with the Saudis? Reid tells me today that he doesn't work for the Saudis, and I believe him. But he sure sounds like a Saudi spokesman, doesn't he? He's trying to be loyal to CTV. Here's the next clip.
Of course we're not as guilty of human rights abuses on a systematic level as they are. But let me tell you
how generous of him. Of course we're not as guilty of systemic abuses. We're not guilty of systemic human rights abuses in Canada at all. We don't force women to wear burqas. We don't whip them if they commit the crime of being raped. It's a crime in Saudi Arabia. We don't ban them from driving. Is Reid really saying that we abuse women in Canada at all? He said we're not as abusive. We're not abusive at all, Scott. Stop the Saudi talking points. By this point, CTV is really looking a little kooky. I mean, but even Scott can't keep it together. Even he has trouble with the Saudi line. So he has to admit that he loves to burn oil himself. And his whole attempt to distract from Saudi censorship and Saudi misogyny by talking about global warming was just empty rhetoric. Look at this weirdness here.
You know what? I drive an SUV because I've got a couple of kids and a dog and all that. And you know what? And you know what? Here's the truth of the matter. I know the harm that it causes, and I'm not going to lie to myself or to my neighbors and pretend otherwise.
Okay,
these ads are designed to lie to yourself. It's to tell yourself I'm not doing any harm. At least I'm not as bad as the next guy.
So you're the biggest hypocrite. If you have the SUV, you know it's wrong.
You know, he just spent the whole argument saying about we've got to care about global warming, and then at the end of the show he says, you know, I guess I really don't care about global warming. I drive a big SUV. But to him, that's as evil as beating women who were raped, as telling women they can't go out with a burqa. To Scott Reed, his own use of carbon dioxide is more heinous than Saudi whipping women. It's gross over there. Friends, I'm sorry I subjected you to so much CTV today. Normally, I really don't care what they say if they want to hire a liberal spin doctor to bash the oil patch as he has for years, or to come to the defense of the Saudis. Hey, that's their funeral. But I'm showing you this to show you how a censored network looks and feels in Canada. They aren't putting Jackie or Tasha in burqas yet, but that's, I mean, that would be too obvious. But they are ordering CTV not to air the full ad, and CTV won't do so. Even as news, they won't do so. CTV knows their job now. Defend the new boss now. Saudi Arabia. Scott's a lot better at it than Tasha is. Defend against the evil oil sands. Defend against those who would say we're morally better than Saudi Arabia. Even ask the question, are we morally better than Saudi Arabia? CTV has a new boss, and he lives in Riyadh. Think I'm joking? Look at this.
Are we really more ethical than countries like Saudi Arabia? And I put this to you because...
Don't tell me she would have said that a week ago. Do not tell me she would have said that a week ago. This isn't an oil issue or a women's rights issue. It's a national security issue and a sovereignty issue. CTV is being bullied by a foreign embassy. They are a hostage, and the results are evident on their news coverage. You tell the Prime Minister you want the Saudi boot off of CTV's next. You tell him, you email him right now, pm@pm.gc.ca. Folks, the day you hear me saying that Canada is no better than Saudi Arabia is the day I pray to God that someone over here has the sense to fire me or to beg the Canadian government to come free me from a Saudi hostage taker.